you know, and
Let me give us a brief introduction.
oh,
And I've got this great, I'm really proud today for today's edition of Pollstar Live One-On-One. I've got the rock and roll renaissance man. He's recognized worldwide it's a long list. He's a long and impressive resume: musician, performer, songwriter, arranger, producer, music supervisor, television producer, actor, director, Broadway, TV and film composer. I could go on. Entrepreneur, activist, historian, teacher, philanthropist, member of Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. He's one of the world's foremost authorities on rock and roll and music in general, and a vital live performer in his own right, both with the legendary E Street Band and his own Disciples of Soul. His underground garage, Little Steven's Underground Garage, is a mainstay of Sirius since 2002. He's behind the Rock and Roll Forever Foundation and teachrock.org, a Rock and Roll Hall of Famer. I knew him first as Miami Steve, then Little Steven, Silvio, Frank. Ladies and gentlemen, Stevie Van Zandt, thanks for doing this.
hey Ray, I'm exhausted.
How you doing today?
Good, good. You forgot Outlaw Country.
Yeah, well, never. I would never forget Outlaw Country. It stays on my Sirius, darling. We'll get into the Sirius stations here in a bit. I want to go back a little bit with you and talk about your influences. Middletown, New Jersey, right?
Right.
That where you first got turned on to music? And
Yeah, I grew up. That's where I grew up. I was born in Boston, but my mother remarried when I was 7. And that's how an Italian kid got a Dutch name. And moved to New Jersey and grew up in New Jersey, Middletown, New Jersey, yeah.
So what was the music scene in Middletown?
Well, it was, you know, an extremely healthy scene. We were the luckiest, I call us the luckiest generation. Because not only was our demographic the luckiest, because, you know, just after World War II, you know, in the 50s into the 60s, we were the richest that we were ever going to be as a country. We're never going to be that rich again, that's for sure. I mean, the conversation at the dinner table was not if, but when we were going to the 4-day work week. Wow. Right? That's how rich we were. And so suddenly there was all of this free time, you know. There was a luxury time. There was no such thing really before that. Pretty much all through history. And that's why something called the teenager was born in the 50s. there was no such thing as teenagers before that. You know, you had adolescence and then, you know, an awkward year or two, and then you got a job, you know. Suddenly there was this, you know, time in between. And that whole teenage thing led to rock and roll, and by the 60s, it was just an out and out renaissance. And so I was very, very lucky to grow up at that time. And we had clubs that were built just for us, just for teenagers. I haven't seen that before or since, you know. We had all kinds of places to play as a local band, you know. We had beach clubs, we had VFW halls and high school dances and, you know, and just, you know, just one constant, you know, we became a whole new entity for the country, a whole new, you know, marketing opportunity, I guess you'd call it. And so, you know, it was a very, very lucky time. We had great music on AM radio. Before there was FM radio, AM radio was great, you know. And then FM came in 67 or so. And that changed, that shifted, you know, that shifted things. But it was just a wonderful time to grow up in the 60s. Every year was a whole new trend, you know. We were talking about it before we went on the air here. 64 was the British invasion, and everybody was into the British invasion. Then 65 came folk rock, you know, then blues rock, then country rock, you know, then psychedelic. And the last trend of the 60s was Southern, white Southern soul. And that was the last trend where everybody was into the same thing. You know, we were very much a a monoculture up until the 70s, you know. Then 70s, it blew wide open and fragmented. And then you know, then there was 100 different genres, from singer-songwriter all the way to heavy metal, you know. But before that, everybody was pretty much in the same bag, you know, year after year, a different bag year after year, but all, you know, listening to the same thing on the same stations, you know. So it was nice. It was a nice kind of, it felt like a family. It felt like you had a generation that was really experiencing the same things, you know.
You know, I came in on the tail end of that, right? I was born in 1960, and it was amazing all the bands that came out of Jersey that were rock and roll bands. And you've spoken before about the big bang of rock and roll, and the Beatles were on Ed Sullivan in '64. And I've talked to so many musicians of your era that saw that and picked up a guitar, or started, Billy Joel's case, started playing the piano, and it spawned thousands of bands, I'm sure, indirectly. Talk about that, and when you saw that on TV and what it meant to.
Well, I mean, I know it's hard to imagine for younger people, but there was no such thing as bands. We had solo artists, you know, mostly. You know, everybody's heard of Chuck Berry and Elvis Presley and Bo Diddley and Jerry Lee Lewis and Little Richard. Then we had doo-wop groups. There were singing groups, you know, harmony groups, you know, everything from the Ravens and Orioles to Five Satins, and you know, and that turned into the Drifters and Coasters. And then there were some instrumental groups, you know, but like the Ventures. But until what we called the British invasion, there wasn't really that many bands that sang and played and eventually wrote their own songs. Really, the Crickets were the only one. And Buddy Holly emerged from the Crickets rather quickly, you know. So they only had a couple of years really together. But other than the Crickets, there literally was no such thing. So here comes the British invasion, all bands. And so February 8th, 1964, there wasn't one band in America. The Beatles played this variety show called Ed Sullivan, February 9th, 1964. And it was one of them things where the whole family used to gather in the one room, in the living room, where the only TV was. And the whole family would watch the same show, which is incredible to believe these days. And the Ed Sullivan would have something for every age group, you know. Here's a puppet show for the kids, and opera for grandma, and something for teenagers, you know. And so something for the teenagers that week was a group called the Beatles. And so 70 million of us saw that. And I swear to God, day before there wasn't one band in America. The next day, February 10th, everybody had a band in their garage, you know. I mean, everybody. Now, how many of those bands got out of the garage, you know, something else. But everybody had one. And then eventually about a dozen of us in the local area actually got out of the garage and started playing. And like I said, there was just 100 places to play in those days. It was wonderful, wonderful time to grow up. You know.
So, by the way, I would add, if anybody watching has questions, you can leave it in the comments, and we'll get to some of those if we can. So you, of course, got out of the garage, and I think that I read you were kicked out of your high school for having long hair, but you went back. So good. Yeah, I got kicked out. I'm not sure if I got kicked out of high school first or kicked out of my house, but one led to the other. And I had to go live with my girlfriend. And then I felt bad for my mother, so I went back and cut my hair. Oh man, it was traumatic. Let me tell you, Ray, it was terrible. But I did it, and it grew back. I've seen some of those pictures. I mean, you did have some hair. A lot of us did. So you were I know you were in a band called the Shadows, and that's when you first crossed paths with Bruce, I think,
Bruce had. I started off as a singer in the Shadows, and then very quickly, as soon as I could learn how to play guitar, I started my own band called The Source.
The Source, yeah.
And Bruce had a band called the Castiles. And like I said, it was only about I don't know, 12 or 15 bands really in our entire area. So we all knew each other, but me and him hit it off right away for some reason. I think we sensed in each other that it wasn't just a weekend thing for us. It wasn't just like a casual hobby. I think, he's the only other guy I met that felt that rock and roll was everything. It was a religion,
How good were these bands? I mean, look, we know you were playing for money, right? So
oh yeah,
the Steels and the Shadows and the Source, and playing places like Team Debut.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, you had to be good. I mean, it was competitive. There was three local bands that recorded, got into recording studio. We were not quite at that level. We were one level below that, but you had to mostly play what was on the radio. Well, actually exclusively what was on the radio, but what kind of radio started to differentiate, by the late 60s, we were playing a lot of FM songs off the radio. So it wasn't not just top 40, what they call top 40, which was pop, basically, But keep in mind, pop music in the 60s was the greatest music ever made, okay? It's a whole different thing than pop now, all due respect, It's called kind of, it's not, it's not the same now. But back in the 60s, the Temptations, were pop. The Beatles were pop. Curtis Mayfield, Smokey Robinson, and Marvin Gaye. The Rolling Stones, the Kinks. These are all having pop hits. So the pop music was already great, but then we kind of expanded our thing once FM came in and started playing longer songs and album cuts. We kind of differentiated ourselves a little bit from each other. My band was more into the Who and Youngbloods and Buffalo Springfield, and Bruce was more like into the Doors and wow. Love, a group called Love.
Yeah, I remember. Hotel, Life is Not a Hotel, or what was that song by Love?
Love had My Little Red Book was their biggest hit. And they had 7 and 7 Is, and I'm going blank right now.
That's all right, but they were one of the great bands that were sort of lost to history, but they did have their moment. I think it was an LA band, right?
Yes, I think they were the first band signed by Elektra.
I didn't realize, so I would have thought you would have been more of a Jersey soul horns kind of thing early on.
Not yet. No. I didn't get into horns until the Jukes, which is a lot later. Yeah, that's almost 10 years later. I mean, we had a lot of dues to pay before we got into the business.
So you kicked around in these bands. You were crossing paths with all the super fertile ground. Assume similar things were going on in Boston, Philadelphia, and up in the city. And
yeah,
like, wow, what a time, and a lot of great musicians. And if you made it and you managed to ever get into a studio, you were probably pretty good. Did it boil down to whether you could write your own material or not?
Yeah, that mattered. It became an issue, And I'm not, to this day, it's sort of with mixed results, because when the artist was different from the songwriters, it took an army to make a record in the 60s up until the late 60s. There's a couple of exceptions like a Chuck Berry, Buddy Holly, Bo Diddley, a couple of guys wrote their own songs, but mostly by the time it got to the 60s, the Brill Building, you get a bunch of great songwriters writing songs, and then you had great arrangers. Every session had an arranger. Now that's the great lost craft of our business, is the arranger, in addition to the producer. And so you had an army of people making great records, And then once the artists kind of took over their own, control of their own destiny, it had mixed results. I mean, it was great, to have the freedom and control, but it was a little bit of the inmates running the asylum too. I mean, got a lot of.
I think that held on, the arranger thing held on longer down here in Nashville probably than it did for the rock acts.
Oh yeah, yeah, and wisely so. And that's why the whole concept of songwriting really, held on longer in Nashville. I mean, by I don't know, by the 80s, 80s, 90s, most of the classic legendary songwriters were looking towards Nashville, I think, and a lot of country music started to become a little bit more rock, a little bit more rock, a little bit more pop. Again, with mixed results, but I think Nashville held on to tradition longer. Yeah, I mean, it wasn't all the way back tradition, but it was a pop tradition in a way. That's why we started Outlaw Country, because country music, when they stopped playing Johnny Cash, I'm like, it's time for a new format. It's time for something new. And so we started Outlaw Country on Sirius Satellite, which is all three generations of Hank Williams, is how I describe it,
Well, that's covering a lot of ground.
It does cover a lot of ground.
Speaking of Nashville, there's legend that you did a brief tour, I think, with Steel Mill, right? One of these bands that come out of that city. But they played Nashville, according to legend. Was that during your tenure?
No, I did join a group called Steel Mill, which was one of Bruce's groups, late 60s, early 70s. But no, we didn't get to Nashville, I don't think.
Well,
I didn't get to Nashville until the E Street Band would come. I'm not sure when, 76, 77, 78, somewhere in there.
I was at that show.
What year was it?
It was 76 on Born to Run. You were the first rock show to play the Opry House.
Yeah, I remember it well because I met Dolly Parton.
Oh, that's memorable.
That's all I remember, and that's all I need to remember. It was great.
So along the way, you finally got in the studio, right? At some point, and then you also co-founded Southside Johnny and the Asbury Jukes. Talk about that, and you worked with the Miami Horns, right? So you early on success as a
at a certain point, me and Southside started Southside Johnny and the Asbury Jukes, and we decided we had gone to see Sam and Dave, who were this fantastic soul music duo. Most people would remember Soul Man or Hold On, I'm Coming.
Yeah.
We saw them in a little club in Asbury Park, and we were sitting, a few feet away, and it's just one of the greatest shows you've ever seen in your life. Those cats were different quality. The 50s and 60s cats was why I refer to it as a renaissance. I mean, first of all, the greatest music in the world being made was also the most commercial. So when you have the greatest art being the most commercial, you got yourself a renaissance. But the quality level of those artists was different because there wasn't overdubbing and they started off with 2 tracks, and went to 4 tracks. And so they got used to, you had to sing it right the first time. You had to really be a great singer in those days, great in general. The quality level was just higher, And so anyway, we saw them and they knocked us out. So we decided me and Johnny were going to be the white Sam and Dave and include and kind of combine the soul horns with the rock guitar, which was unique. And coming out of the 60s, growing up with that, you had to be unique. You had to find your hook, you had to find what made you different, because every single group in the 60s had some kind of personality that was, their own, it's not like now, where the opposite is true. When somebody has a pop hit now, they want to find somebody that sounds just like them, you know. That wasn't the case really going on in the 60s. So we come out of that with that kind of consciousness. And so you want to find your unique place in the world, you know, your rationalization for existence, you know, if you will. And ours was combining, you know, the rock and soul together, which is what I went back to these last 3 years, you know, which has turned out to be the most productive 3 years of my life was these last 3 years. You know, I got 5 album packages in the last 3 years, man. It's, you know, I never have been, you know, that productive. So it's been wonderful. But I went back to that sound because it was my most unique identity was that rock and soul thing. I started with the Jukes. Yeah. So I went back to it myself with the Disciples of Soul.
And it's really cool. And it's a great, you're right. It is a unique sound and a fusion. And it comes right out of your heart, right? And where you're from, I think that's really obvious. But you're more versatile than people who don't know you would assume. I mean, I've seen you go hard rock. I mean, the live really brings it out, but you've been with some pretty tight units going hard rock, guitar slinger stuff, and you can veer off into reggae or world music, or you can go into more pop sound. So it's interesting that you settled on that when you're such a versatile musician and guitar player.
But growing up, because of those trends, you know, every year, the trend being different, you kind of went to school and learned from every single different genre, you know, because you weren't sure where you're going to end up. Some people, you know, went through the blues trend, you know, through that blues movement, and some people stayed there, you know, like a Stevie Ray Vaughan, you know, and some of the rest of us, we just pick a little something from there, pick something from that one, and you're building your identity as you go. We had a country band for a while, you know. Well, we did almost everything, you know, because you're still learning about who you are and what you like, and you are what you like at that moment. So, you know, you take a little bit of this, a little bit of that, and then you end up deciding, well, okay, this feels like me, you know, this feels like me. So, you know. You try and find your own unique place if you can.
Well, your history, if you're going to cover it, you got to cover those tours and watching this rocket go up. It's so few artists get to experience, you know, with these tours basically around the world, and each time was bigger, right? You had Border Run, and then Darkness. We waited a couple of years. You played Municipal here, and then you go the River World Tour. And those, I mean, what's it like to be part of a rocket ship and watch the rooms get bigger and bigger, and you're kind of you're not the laser focused part of it, but you're on this ride, and then you of course moved to something else. But
well, we were very lucky. There was an infrastructure that was created that we got in on. I guess you'd call it in the middle, you know. Closer to the end than the beginning, but more in the middle of this infrastructure that was created by a guy named Frank Barcelona, who very briefly was an agent back when agents were real agents and worked for a living. And he decided that what's important in the business is how good a group is live. You know, which was a unique way of thinking. He said, if you're great live, the records and the hits and the radio will follow. That was an odd way to look at things.
Then,
you know, back then. And then he, you know, in the old days, all the promoters were the old school promoters. They were older guys. They didn't like rock and roll. And they were thieves, you know, of course. Some things don't change. I'm just kidding. I'm kidding my promoter friends. But he decided, you know, he's going to put his own guys in, which were younger guys, in and make it a regional thing. So, you know, he put Ronnie Delsner was New York, you know, and Larry Maggot was Philly, you know, and Don Law was Boston, you know. You know, and so they had a loyalty to him. And what he did was he said to them, listen, you don't have to worry anymore that somebody's going to come steal your act when they get big. You're going to be with this act forever. Okay. So you're going to lose money first couple tours, then you're going to break even for a couple tours, and then you're going to make money for the rest of your life. And what that did was create something that the business had never known, which was longevity, you know, security, longevity. And when you got longevity and security, you got an industry, you know. So he created the industry single-handedly, you know. It lasted for 30 years.
That's
so
right.
we got in on that. He was our agent. He was one of my best friends. And in those days, you would go and play a town, and if you were great, next time you came back to that town, everybody brought 3 friends. That was normal. That was what normally, you know, happened. Now this doesn't happen anymore, unfortunately. So nowadays it's a lot tougher, and the infrastructure isn't there, by the way, anymore. But we're trying to make adjustments with it, and that's why I started my radio show. That's why I started my record company. You know, I think, you know, the Live Nations and AEGs of the world are trying to adjust to deal with developing new bands, because Frank Barcelona said, the minute you have a national promoter, there goes development. Ain't gonna be no more development. Nobody's gonna pay attention to the little bands. They only wanna make money from the big bands, you know, and that's what happened, you know.
Well, you had promoters, they could lose their house if the show stiffed, right? You know, that was their
the promoters were live show to show in the old days. Yeah, it wasn't a big corporation. But like, again, you weren't going to lose money for long with Frank, because, you know, he made sure the promoters made money, because that was part of the system. So he divided the country just the same way that, you know, Maranzano and Luciano divided the mob. You know? that's how the mafia worked for about 50 years also. Probably still does, probably.
You were so good. I mean, by the time you got to touring nationally, that band could go, man. It looked like you've been playing together for 30 years, and just that 70s era, man, that group could kill it.
Yeah, like I said, we probably had longer development than anybody. I mean, the Beatles also had a very long development period. They've been together since '57, somewhere at the end of '57, I believe, and they broke through '63 in England and then '64 in America. So they had 5 or 6 years in the bars. We probably had about 7. We probably just had a little bit longer than the Beatles even. So that was a long time to pay your dues and to whatever they call woodshedding, or, you know, developing your craft, basically what it is. Most bands don't have that long a period before they either break up or find some other work to do. You know, luckily or unluckily, me and Bruce Springsteen had no choice. You know, we didn't have no plan B, you know, so we're gonna, you know, we messed around, like I said, this genre, that genre, this band, that band, 6, 7 years until we finally broke into the business. You know, so by the time you saw us, it was very similar to when we saw the Beatles. We saw the Beatles halfway through the career. They were phenomenal when we saw the Beatles. I mean, they were too good. I mean, we needed the Rolling Stones to come 4 months later to actually encourage us to do what we do, because the Beatles were too perfect. You know, the harmony was perfect. You know, they had the hair was perfect, the clothes, they had, you know, they were a different species from a different planet. And we were like, man, that's a wonderful new world. That's giving me hope, you know, but they're not exactly inviting you in. The Rolling Stones come 4 months later. They don't have no harmony. They got different clothes on from each other. The hair's all messed up except for Brian Jones. And, you know, and they made it look easier than it was, you know. And so they were really the first punk band in that sense. And so they made it look, I mean, obviously they were fantastic, but they made it look easy. So you said, well, this Beatles thing, I like that, but I don't think I can do it. This Rolling Stones thing, I could give that a shot, you know. So that was the story, you know.
You were tighter than the Stones, I'll tell you that. And not, you know, that's what I love about the Stones. Don't get me wrong. But the thing about it is, as soon as you do this journey and you get to world tours and arenas and stadiums, then you back away. You go form this smaller group and you start your own thing. And by the way, I saw that band. You rolled through this club in Nashville. It was tiny. I don't even remember the name of it. I'm sure it's not open. It would have been
exit in, or no,
it wasn't exit in. It was a dive, but y'all blew the doors off of the place. And I think 85 maybe.
My first band was 11 piece, you know, almost what I went out with these last 3 years. The only thing I added these last 3 years was the 3 girl singers. So I was going out with 11 pieces even then. Yeah, I left the band to learn about myself and learn about politics and learn what makes the world go around. You know, I just had a need to do that. You know.
Well, what do you think about that now? I mean, that was a big change from these massive arenas to this place I saw you in. You know?
Yeah, well, on the one hand, I look at it as the biggest mistake of my life. Okay, it was a ridiculous, foolish thing to do. On the other hand, I kind of learned everything I know since I left the band, and we had some success in politics. You know, with South Africa. You know, would the South African government have fallen had we not done that Sun City project? Probably, but it would have been years later. We cut, at the very least, I know we cut years off of the apartheid system in South Africa, bringing that government down, you know? So we saved lives doing that without any question. So I kind of justify it that way, you know? I'm like, well, I lost, you know, I don't know, 10, 20, $30 million, probably more, you know. Is that worth saving some lives? And I got to say, yeah, you know, I'd probably do it again, you know.
Well, I have to think the riders were a little different when you switched from the Bruce to the
I'm never a big rider guy. My rider is, you know, 2 bottles of water. Just make sure they're in glass because I don't like plastic.
Well, you know what the amazing thing, the Disciples of Soul records, those early ones that just got reissued, by the way, right? And they're amazing records. They had basic themes in them, but they also had these bigger themes, what we would call social justice themes now, with Solidarity and Desaparecidos, and you played that great that night, by the way. I'm a Patriot. And then, of course, as you said, the Artists United Against Apartheid in Sun City. Somewhere along the line, you decided, I'm going to be more than just a guitar player in a rock and roll band. How did you come to that realization?
Well, I wasn't really planning it. You know, it just kind of happened. I started reading. I mean, we did the first European tour was the River. But really the first time we really spent some time in Europe, and a kid came up to me and said, you know, why are you putting missiles in my country? You know, and at that point of my life, I never paid any attention to politics. I mean, I grew up in the 60s and didn't pay attention to politics, okay? You had the civil rights movement, the women's movement, gay movement, you know, environmental movement, Vietnam, assassinations. I missed all of that. I didn't catch any of it. I was just like, rock and roll, sex, back to rock and roll, a little more sex, rock and roll, you know, that was it for me, man, you know. So I'm like, wait a minute, I'm putting missiles in you. I'm not putting missiles in your country, kid. That's, you know, and it just stuck with me. And I thought, wait a minute, this kid doesn't look at me like a guitar player or a Republican or a Democrat or, you know. He sees me as an American. And it never occurred to me, I'm a little slow, Ray, you know that, right? I'm a little slow.
I'm with
So
you.
it never occurred to me that I was an American, until you leave America. You know what I mean? At that point, you like become an American, and so I was like, whoa, I'm an American. What does that mean? I guess if we're a democracy, which it turns out we're really not a democracy, but we're mostly a democracy. That if we are, then I guess I am putting missiles in this country, and I wondered what else I was doing. So I started studying our foreign policy since World War II, and I found that surprisingly we were on the wrong side of a lot of wars, because I'd grown up with, my father was a ex-Marine, Goldwater Republican. So I knew all about that. And so it was, country is always right, and all that, my country right or wrong. And so all of a sudden I'm seeing, man, our country wasn't living up to the promise of its ideals by supporting all of these dictators all around the world. And so I felt I had to say something about it. I just felt compelled to write about it. And I figured, well, again, looking for that unique identity, I'll be the political guy. There's not, there's a lot of people taking part in political protests or concerts and things like that. And, but not a lot of guys doing it in their work. You know what I mean? In the songs themselves, there'd been a song here and there, Buffalo Springfield, For What It's Worth. Jefferson Airplane, Volunteers America, the greatest of all, of course, Neil Young's Crosby, Stills and Nash's Ohio, but a song here, a song there, but nobody was doing it full time, album by album, So I decided that'll be my thing, and that's when I really started songwriting. I've been songwriting for Johnny and the Jukes, that's about it. So I started writing a whole different style of songwriting, which involved, political situations, and you humanize the politics and you tell a story, because it's a storytelling art form that we work in, But I would turn it into a story, write about it, like in Los Desaparecidos, for instance, that you mentioned. And then on the album covers, I list a bunch of books that you could read if you're interested in the subject, because we communicate emotion most effectively. Once in a while we communicate information, but the art form is more built to communicate emotion, really. So you want to get people involved, engaged emotionally, and then if they want details about where that song comes from, you could read one of the books.
Always the teacher. Well, look, I would say no matter what it is, though, the music has to hold up. I mean, I did an interview about Alice Cooper with his manager, right, Shep Gordon. And the shot thing, that's all well and good in the theatrics, but if it's not underpinned by great rock and roll, it doesn't matter. So even your political stuff, if it's still great rock and roll, and that's how you get people to listen, and that's how you got people.
Oh, that's so true, Ray. And people forget that sometimes, critics tend to forget that a little bit, although I've had nothing but good luck with critics my whole life. But sometimes people think that lyrics are somehow driving the success of something. I mean, Bob Dylan's the greatest example of that. People always talk about Bob Dylan and his lyrics. Now, if he had just been doing lyrics, he'd still be in Greenwich Village, doing poetry reading. He's one of the greatest singers of all time, okay? And people don't realize it. He may not have had the prettiest voice of all time, it's different. Having a great voice, like a Pavarotti voice, is one thing, but being a great singer is another. And he's one of the greatest singers ever. And fantastic guitar player. He's doing all that finger picking on them early albums the same time as he's singing. There wasn't no overdubbing. He's doing that fancy finger picking as he's singing, and then he, all those great chord changes and melodies. So it was, all about the music, even with Bob Dylan. Yes, the lyrics are nice icing on the cake, but they're going to always be icing on the cake. They ain't never going to be the cake.
I couldn't agree more, but you got me thinking. I'd love to hear Pavarotti sing "Idiot Win." We got to see if we can find that.
We're not going to have that chance, Ray.
It's somewhere in the basement. So we're covering a lot of ground here. I definitely want to touch on the acting, and I'll get to some of these questions. We've got quite a few. In 1999, with no acting experience, you get this choice role on what I would consider the greatest television series of all time, Silvio, and how great that was. What was the learning curve moving from this live, immediate thing of rock and roll to the more drawn-out process of acting in a television series?
Yeah, it was a challenge. I had the benefit of my wife being a real actor. She'd been going to acting school for many years, and we talk about it when she came back from class. You know, so I was kind of familiar with that whole art form, which is quite different. And you know, I kind of grown up in Jersey, which is you're always one guy away from the mob anyway, and whether it's a real guy or whether it's a wannabe doesn't matter because they're equally scary, so you're kind of familiar with the milieu, you're familiar with that world, with a little distance, obviously. But I had just out of a hobby, I had read every book and seen every movie all the way back to the early Cagney and all that stuff. And I just kind of was a fan of the genre. So I just felt I could do it. I felt I could do it if I could look in the mirror and see the guy. So I decided, I need to create the guy from the outside in, and that's what I did. I decided he's going to be more of a traditionalist. So I'm going to have that, 50s kind of hair. And I found out where John Gotti got his clothes made. It was good timing because John had just gone to jail. So the tailor was kind of looking for something to do. I got the Sopranos to hire the guy. And so when I came out of that, and I also wrote a whole biography about the guy, just for my own benefit, really. I shared it with the writers just for the hell of it, but it was mostly for me, just to have a good sense of who this guy was, So when I walked out of that trailer, my guy was, part of my biography was he's fearless, and Tony Soprano's right-hand man, and I ended up using a lot of my relationship with Bruce Springsteen as the role, as the dynamic of that relationship with Silvio and Tony Soprano,
That's amazing. I love that, but there was a great quote, a Silvio quote, it's something to the effect of, in a recession, two things do well, entertainment and our thing. I've used that before, but our thing now being live entertainment, if it was a normal recession, I think live entertainment would probably be thriving without the virus, and I think we miss it as a society now. I think it's an outlet we don't have. But when Silvio got whacked, man, that was tough. I couldn't believe he wasn't.
No. He's still breathing. Okay. He's in a coma. just in case there's ever a sequel.
That's important, right? So I want to talk, and then we had a question. Then you carried the whole thing with Lilyhammer, and that was an amazing, dry humor, dark, kind of a Fargo-esque vibe to it. And I loved it, and I loved the music.
Thank you. I'm very proud of Lilyhammer. We were the first original content on Netflix. And let me tell you something, that says a lot about Ted Sarandos, the content, the head of content at Netflix, because to start off that whole new idea of content creation with a show, a Norwegian show with subtitles, that took some cojones, baby. Okay. And I'll never stop being grateful to him for having that kind of courage, you know, to just do what he believed in and trusting me. I mean, there was no notes, no like, show me something first. I mean, he was just like, he totally trusted me. And so it made me want to, you know, that made me want to deliver, you know, even more than I always over deliver. I don't, you know, if I take a job, I'm going to over deliver. But in this case, it was quite a challenge because they wanted more of a family comedy in Norway, you know, and it was like surprise. So we had to walk that line because I didn't want to do a comedy. I told them it's got to be a dramedy. I want to have some serious stuff in there. It's going to make the show last longer, and you know, I can't make fun of these guys. You know, I gotta, you know, the humor can come from circumstance. They can come from character in you know, funny circumstance. But I don't want anybody trying to be funny. You know.
Well, it's got this strange vibe to it that once you put your finger on it and settle into it, okay, this is how it is. Then you go along for this amazing ride. And frankly, I wasn't ready for it to end. And there was a question for Frankie the Fixer. It's like, when are we going to get season 4? To quote Junior Soprano, we're waiting here like patience on a monument. I love that.
I'd love to do that, but the business got a little complicated. You know, it was quite a complicated situation. So I don't know. I never say never. You never know. You know, I go back in a minute. I do it tomorrow. I loved it.
Well, according to this gentleman, you got a lot of fans in Liverpool, Northern Ireland, and Norway. I don't know if he lives in all three, but and they also like your shirt.
Well, there you go, man. That's a real fan.
You've done 6 tours on the E Street Band, including the up to 17. Can you say anything about any other? Is there, when we can hope to see something like that again?
Oh, you mean in the future?
You did a great like studio album, right? Live in the studio.
Yeah, we just did a new album coming out at the end of October. You know what? I really thought this thing would be handled better than it has been. So I knew it was going to be 3 stages from the beginning. You know, once we realized what it was, which was March, I realized, well, it's going to be 3 things. Everything's going to be online for the first stage. It's where we are now. The second stage, once we got some tests that were accurate and fast, which we're kind of moving into now, I guess, then you know, sporting events could start again, but with no audience. And to some extent, I guess concerts could start again with no audience, maybe. But these tests are not great, and they're not fast, and they're not plentiful. They should have been, the second stage should have been more together by now. So that second stage has taken forever. The third stage is going to be even worse, I think. The third stage, which is the vaccine stage, you know, forget about this nonsense about having one this year. You know, that's as good as the Russian one that was, you know, they've had a Russian vaccine for 2 months. You want to try it? You know, good luck with that. Okay, the one that they're coming out here before the election, you know, is going to be in that same category of like, you first. Go ahead. The truth of the matter is, the real cats are saying end of 2024. Okay, 2024. Before there's something that works, actually functions, and the whole world gets, you know, the distribution is going to be a whole nother trip, you know. Now, obviously, we'll get it, you know, we'll get it sooner than, you know, we won't be the last ones to get it. But I don't think you're going to see anything serious, you know, till maybe next summer, you know. So maybe with a little bit of luck, we might see some action by summer of 21. I'm hoping. you know, believe me, as soon as we can, we're gonna do it. But it's too scary, man, to take a chance. You know,
obligatory question, but no matter who it's with, what would it take for you to do a show? I mean, to get on stage with a band and engage and play.
You know, it's hard to maintain that kind of distance, and you know, you can't do it with masks on. You can't do it 6 feet apart. You know, so you gotta have a foolproof test that works within an hour or two, because these tests that, you know, everybody's bragging about take 6, 7, 8 days before you get the results, which is irrelevant. They're wasting their time. Okay, you know, so you got to be able to take the test, stay isolated until the test results come back, whatever, with your band, with your sports team, with whoever you want to be with. You know, they all got to take a test together, stay isolated until the test results come back, and then you can work. You know, then you can act. You know, you can have a normal either concert or sporting event. You know, but if the tests are coming back 8 days later, I mean, it's, you know, it's just a complete waste of time. So I'm not. So it's going to take a test. I mean, they're trying. You know, we'll see how long football lasts. You know, I hope it works out. But I'll be surprised if it works out, because the test hasn't been fast enough. You know, we did not put the resources into making those tests a priority, which should have been happening since January. But, you know, don't get me started with all of that. But anyway, so that's what it's going to take. It's going to take a test that is fast and accurate, and something that people can take all in the same time, have a result within hours or within minutes, you know, hopefully, that you can trust. At that point, you can get together and you can do whatever. You can do a play, you know, you can go back to making movies and making TV, you know, you can do a sporting thing, you know, but you know, what's not working right now is the kids going back to school. This is a complete disaster. You know, we see it right here. You know, we see we're right near a college, and at night the kids are all on the street with no masks on, and they're hanging out in, you know, the bars, no masks on, and these schools are opening and then they're closing a couple of weeks later. You know, so it's a really weird thing. You know? Well,
in the meantime, you've had this amazing run of releases. Soulfire Live, a 7-album box set of live music. I mean, that's a fan's dream. And then in Rock and Roll Rebel, the early work.
Yeah.
Albums from 82 to 99. And then Summer of Sorcery, man, that's ambitious work. And that band that's out there, 14 plus you.
Yeah. It's been I'm telling you, it's been the most productive 3 years of my life. The Summer of Sorcery Live box, now we moved it to next year. We moved that to May because so much stuff's coming out this year. And yeah, we got the Rock and Roll Rebel box out right now, which is all my studio albums, plus 3 shows, three DVDs, you know, the first 3 tours we did. And then I finally got the Lilyhammer score out, which is half jazz and half everything else. You know, all the cues I use in Lilyhammer over those 24 shows. We finally got that out, which I'm very happy with, and that's got a whole bunch of cool things on it too. So yeah, there was 5 altogether, and you know, if that's all I end up getting done, you know, I'm all right with that. Tell you the truth, it's been, you know, it's been fun. It's been good. I'll find something to do. I don't know what, but you know, but it was a good way. It was a good way to go. You know, that finally to reconnect with my own work after 20 years was extremely meaningful to me. You know, and it happened by accident. You know, Cat just said, throw a band together and play my blues festival. You know, I had nothing to do, and I said, well, I'll give it a shot. I haven't done that in a long time, you know, and you know, and it was so much fun. We said, well, let's make a record. I said, well, I can't write a record. I haven't written a record in, you know, over 20 years. So let's just do, you know, songs I wrote for other people, you know. So that's what Soulfire was, and then we did it. That turned into a tour, and halfway through the tour, the ideas for a new stuff started coming into my head. It was turned into Summer of Sorcery. So it's been a wonderful accident in these last 3 years, and the band that Mark Ribler put together for me was the key, you know, because they stayed loyal and they stayed with me and gave me that security, that foundation to then, you know, not only come back and be reacquainted with my own work, but also, you know, to be able to actually free my mind up to have a creativity again, you know, put that radar back up that catches ideas for songs which had been down for 20 years, you know. So I give my band all the credit, you know. All of those cats were so great. I mean, and so it's been a, you know, I got no complaints this year, Ray. I'm usually very frustrated by my output, very frustrated, but not this past 3 years, man. I gotta say, we got as much out as I think is humanly possible.
You've been band member and band leader. What makes a good band member and what makes a good band leader?
Well, I think it certainly does help to be both. I'll tell you that, you know, because you really get a good sense of both sides of the story. You know, I think what makes a good band leader is making sure everybody gets a chance to contribute and have dignity, you know, not just coming and doing a job that's the same every day, that's written out for you, and, you know, like a factory, you know. I like to try to create a little space for everybody to be creative as much as they can. And I would, after every single show, you know, I would have a dinner. We would have dinner after the show in a hotel or some restaurant nearby, just for the esprit de corps, you know, just for to hang out with everybody. And, you know, I pick my band members. They have to be great, first of all, but I also pick them according to their personality to make sure they get along. You know, there's no bad vibes, you know, no bad vibes in my band whatsoever, you know.
15 people, that's a lot of personalities, man.
It is, man, it is. And, you know, and you can use, you know, after all this time, I can usually tell during the rehearsal process, somebody ain't gonna work out, you know. But I've been very lucky. We only replaced, you know, one or two people in 3 years. And so, you know, it's a family. That's how I think, you know. It's a solo, but it's a hybrid solo. I'm not a solo guy, you know. I'm a band guy. Yeah. Happens to be doing some solo records, you know, but I'm gonna turn it into a band anyway. I mean, I spent those 7 years with the Sopranos trying to turn them into a band. You know what I mean? You know, because the acting thing is a different world, man. They gotta, and understandably so, because, you know, in music, I mean, we have some kind of fun competition with each other, maybe, you know, but it's not. But we really are more of a family, and you don't have that kind of him or me thing in music. You know, there's room for everybody. You know, acting, you know, you get the role or you go home. You know, you know, however many lines there are in that scene, you know, if he gets one more, you get one less, you know. So it's kind of a competition thing built into it that I found very uncomfortable at first, you know. I'm just not that way. I'm just not my ego doesn't work that way, you know, to be competitive. You know, I'm more of a, you know, conflict resolution type of guy. In the end, the Sopranos very much turned into a family, a band, like a band, and it wasn't just because of me. It was Jimmy Gandolfini's attitude, because he was a character actor that suddenly found himself as a leading man, and he never was really comfortable with it. He has a character actor, heart. And so it kept things on a very humble and a kind of a humble basis, and allowed everybody to become friendlier, I think, without as much competition. But I think this is just built in. It's built into the art form in a way that's different than music. So by the end, though, it was the same. We had the Sopranos, all singing the same song.
That's for sure, and what a great song it was. You've been so generous with your time. We're hitting on an hour. I could do this all day, but I'm respectful. I will wrap it on, you basically said rock and roll could change the world, and you have the Rock and Roll Forever Foundation and Teach Rock. Tell me how rock and roll can change the world, and what your best hopes are for that happening.
Well, my best hopes right now is the teachrock.org, my Rock and Soul Forever Foundation. It's still called Rock and Roll Forever Foundation, but it's going to be changing to Rock and Soul. But the teachrock.org curriculum is basically, the idea is to get the arts integrated into the education system. That's the main thing, We also happen to find a methodology for teaching that works with this generation, who are faster than us, smarter than us, and have no patience whatsoever. We figured out a way to deal with that. And that's why the teachers love this curriculum. And eventually we want to affect the dropout rate. We do. We want to improve the graduation rate, because kids that are dropping out are ending up in jail, basically, half of them. So we want to change that long term. But the main thing, integrating the arts into the system completely. Every discipline, every class needs to have the arts integrated. And we have one partner school right now, Orangethorpe, in Orange County, just outside LA, part of LA, I guess it is, where kindergarten through 6th grade, they're using our curriculum and those 6th grade levels, and every discipline, every class, every age group.
Wow.
And let me tell you something, when you see it working, we're going to eventually do something with that. We're going to do a documentary on it or something. I can tell you that right now, if we ever get back to normal. But the last thing before the quarantine happened was I visited this school, like March 12th. I mean, it was real close. And I was just amazed. But after 15 years of work, we've been working on it 15 years, to see it actually functioning, man, was very, very exciting. So I still feel rock and soul music can change the world, but I think that it's really about the arts. I mean, I say rock and roll, meaning the arts in general, need to be integrated into our school system. It changes the entire teaching process. It changes the way kids feel about education, because in the arts, there's no wrong answers. It's all about instinct and emotion and imagination, and we need to emphasize those things and encourage them. And that helps all the other disciplines. Kids are not that comfortable with precision at first. Some kids are, some kids aren't, with the precision of science and of math. But once they get comfortable with an artistic kind of reflection on those disciplines, they get comfortable with it. And so it's going to help everything. And I saw it working. So I have great, great hopes for the future, that's where it's at, man. Getting the arts integrated into every single classroom in the world. And I tell you right now, it's going to affect the future in a positive way.
Well, we'll support you. Let us know whatever we can do to get the word out. It's been an incredible career. I followed a long time, all the way before this, when I had a mullet. I was hanging with Miami Steve
Man, I wish I knew I was that good looking back then.
Good looking man right there. Look,
I didn't know. Nobody told me.
I appreciate you, man, and I'm pulling for you. I've followed your career, and I love what you do. So thank you so much for your time, and
Thank you, Ray.
look forward to the next one.
Thank you, Ray. Great talking to you.
You too. Thanks a lot, Steve. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.